Harvey World. Inner city crime was at an all-time high according to the media. Thankfully, my wife and I had moved out into the suburbs a year prior to our marriage. Unfortunately, these suburbs was only a short drive from the inner city limits, an urban suburb called Harvey. Oh boy. In the 50s, Harvey was recognized for birthing one of the well-known R&B groups, the Dells, who are now inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Along with music, there have been several major sports figures to come out of Harvey, such as Antoine Randall of the Pittsburgh Steelers and Kevin Duckworth of the San Antonio Spurs. In the 80s, Harvey also gained recognition for the iconic mall chase, which took place inside of Dixie Square Mall in the iconic movie The Blues Brothers. Those who have known Harvey in his heyday truly speak of Harvey with great pride. Sad to say, but fast forward to the present, and Harvey has not only earned a new reputation, but also has placed statistically as being one of Chicagoland's roughest cities. 15 years of Harvey allowed me to see both the good and the bad side. In my opinion, Harvey seemed like a lower middle class community, although some might argue to say it was more like an upper lower class community. It was right down the border between being okay and not so okay. The great thing was that there were some pretty decent and hardworking people in Harvey. When I arrived there initially, I believe many of the houses on the housing market in the community were somewhere around the range of $80,000 to $120,000. While many of the abandoned houses on the rehab market sold as low as $30,000. This made Harvey the perfect target for inner city relocation. Harvey definitely became one of the major catch basins for dozens of inner city families. One summer, I saw 6 new families move into the neighborhood from the city. The crazy thing was, they often moved out just as fast as they moved in. Many times, they couldn't maintain the required agreements. Harvey also became a prime location for an abundance of Latino families who were relocating as well. Our neighborhood seemed open to all newcomers, but the inner city rush was really beginning to take over. Those who came from the inner city seemed to have somewhat of a different mentality, especially the younger people. Their energy was different. They seemed to be more hyper. Their perception was different. They tended to see red. But after 5 years of gang war, I started to see red also. Red and black t-shirts and baseball caps were the colors most seen in the area. I saw those colors so much, I almost completely stopped wearing them for quite a while. Those colors seemed to be linked repeatedly to so much drama. The headliners for the mayhem in our neighborhood were the Gangster Disciples and the Latin Kings. These two gangs seemed to be everywhere. The Latin Kings were a Hispanic gang. Our neighborhood was about 30% Hispanic. From what I saw, many of the older Hispanic people were very hard workers and stayed to themselves. They were determined to tend to their own business. However, the younger generation of Latinos seemed to have a totally different perspective. They wanted their respect and were not going to be denied. Outside of the 30% Hispanic population, the rest of Harvey was made up of mostly black families, sprinkled with just a few white families and a few Middle Eastern families which began to show up later. Harvey was a real melting pot that was on its way to a real meltdown. A day in the life. In some of the more urbanized suburbs, the tension is often high due to the congestion of people and the scarcity of jobs. This makes for the perfect suburban minefield. You realize at some point something could jump off because the natives are getting restless. As far as I'm concerned, the kids had it the toughest. For many of them, crossing through Harvey was like trying to cross the African plain. They had to move very carefully because they knew the beasts of the wild were lurking about. Many kids in the area walked in groups or took off-beaten streets to avoid the gangs. For some kids, getting from point A to point B was a strategic maneuver. They always had to be in stealth mode. The Gangster Disciples, or the GDs as they're called on the streets, were one of the main gangs in the area. They seemed to be all over the place. In fact, there were so many of them that they often sometimes were at odds with each other. Even though they were part of the same gang, often there were territorial disputes. Sometimes one side of town might not necessarily like those from another side of town, regardless of the gang association. As a result, from time to time, boundaries were crossed, which caused territorial disputes. I happen to live a few houses away from what became one of the neighborhood gang headquarters. As a result, I got a first-hand look at the day-to-day drama of gang life. I've always been in outreach ministry of some sort, which has always pushed me to believe if you're going to do ministry, it has to start at home first. From the first day I moved on the block and saw the abundance of young men hanging out, I knew Advanced Street Ministry 101 was about to begin. My wife and I were very active in church at the time. I was one of the main teachers at our church. The church for me was always like a classroom. It was supposed to be the place where you go and learn the things of God and then go out into the world and prove those things. Did you get that? And prove them. Unfortunately, what is often being taught in church has little to no effect on what's actually going on outside of the church. It's often not applicable. In today's world, we need the wisdom of true light and understanding for what is often very dark situations. With all that was going on in the neighborhood, I needed to find God our Father like never before. I now had more than enough reason to seek Him. Besides the fact to have a good and peaceful life, I also figured if I could get close enough to God our Father, then maybe I could legitimately help a few people who I knew were facing problems. In my heart, I honestly wanted to make a difference in people's lives. More than anything else, I needed God because I was tired of tripping myself up in my own stupidity. I was definitely desperate at this point, but little did I know I was about to gain a whole new motivation in my quest for God our Father. The ongoing shooting in the neighborhood was putting everybody in a constant life and death state of affairs. The gang war was now raging completely out of control. Regretfully, our block became the bullseye for many days and nights of gang mayhem. For several months bullets were flying, and a few people had even been shot. None that I know were fatal, which was a blessing within itself when you consider how much they were shooting. Unfortunately, police couldn't seem to gain control over the situation. As a result, people were growing more scared each day to the point of not wanting to come outside. As for myself, I had been in the military for nearly 10 years, so I was sort of used to high anxiety. Besides, I truly believed in my heart that God our Father was covering me the same way He had always covered me, especially during the times of the Gulf War. I had the same feeling and confidence for my family as well. I felt we would be okay. However, what really began tearing at my soul was when, for some strange reason, several neighbors began reaching out to me. With dire stress in their voice, they would often ask, "What are we going to do, Mike? Things are really getting bad." Strangely enough, I honestly felt it was my job to try to do something. Unfortunately, at this point, my resources were very limited in every way due to having been ill for nearly 2 years just a year before. So I would have to resolve the situation the same way I resolved everything else in my life, with God. My story in the beginning was like any other Christian story. I was a man going to church and trying to fulfill the routine of finding God. Who knew my greatest lessons and revelations about God our Father would come each day while stuck smack dab in the middle of a gang war?